Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel. It's Cynicalex, and today I want to do a little follow-up video about tier 4s in general, but also more specifically to continue the conversation about Shadow Shell and Black Widow, because I think a lot of people are looking at these characters and they're thinking like, why would I build one when I can just build the other? But then you look a little bit deeper and you do a full comparison and things get actually weirder and more confusing, okay? So let's take a look at some things. First of all, I want to apologize for yesterday's video where I didn't include the screenshots. So these are the screenshots. This was 1 minute and 12 seconds on stage 63 with this team here. It's not the exact same team that I used on stage 64 in the video, but it was still markedly faster than Black Widow was able to do with her ideal team. That's Shuri, who's dead there, using stage 64. Anyways, that was the clip that I referred to where it was a 45-second clear, and even if I added 30 seconds, being generous with like a much better run, it still would have been 1 minute and 15, which was still like 30 seconds or 45 seconds slower than the run that I did in the video. So clearly, right, it doesn't take, you know, a rocket scientist to see that Shadow Shell is better than Black Widow for PvE, for World Boss Legend content specifically. Sorry, I gotta be really careful with this comparison because it's not just PvE, it's specifically World Boss Legend. Okay, so Shadow Shell is definitely better than Black Widow for World Boss Legend. Okay, she seems to be as good or slightly better for Alliance Battle Legend content, and you can see that if you just go to go to YouTube and you look up, you know, Shadow Shell ABL, and then you pull up the content. You know, she's meta, high scoring, all this stuff. Okay, cool. So she's better for World Boss Legend, she's better for Alliance Battle Legend, and if you pair her with Sunbird, she has a revive, so she can be used in PvP probably as effectively as Black Widow, maybe more effectively. So isn't Shadow Shell just straight up better than Black Widow? Well, no, not exactly. And the reason for that is so bizarre, and this is what spawned the topic in my mind, okay? So Shadow Shell is actually worse than Black Widow and worse than other speed types, specifically in ABX. And there was a bunch of videos that came out saying she was bugged, and then there was videos coming out saying she's not bugged, okay? It's so weird, right? You're telling me this character is better for World Boss Legend, she's as good or better for Alliance Battle Legend, but then she's straight up worse for ABX? For ABX, for Alliance Battle Extreme, the one that comes before Legend, Shadow Shell is worse. Like, it's not even close. Like, she's visibly worse than Black Widow. She may even be worse than Makari, who is now like 1.5 years old almost. This is very bizarre, but this is what got me thinking that they're doing this tier 4 balancing. And so this is what I wanted to talk about today, this tier 4 balancing that they're trying to achieve, where they essentially try not to directly power creep an existing tier 4 with the same classification, typing, side, gender. They try not to power creep it directly in the exact same way, right? So in this case, Shadow Shell is almost directly better than Black Widow, but she's not. And because they're so close in ABL, and because Black Widow is still visibly better in ABX, it doesn't make sense if you're only building for that game mode and you already have Black Widow to get Shadow Shell. So it becomes this very confusing, you know, abacus, like you're dealing with fractions and percentages and shit. But it makes sense, right? It makes sense. They didn't do as good of a job, clearly, with the combat type balancing, and you can sort of see that with Captain America, where he's actually really bad for ABX. And it makes no sense because he hits so hard. He's so strong for World Boss Legend. So it's almost like there's something behind the scenes. There's some knobs behind the scenes that they're turning to make characters specifically good or specifically bad for content. Now, it doesn't matter when the character exists in a vacuum and doesn't have really any competition, right? Like, they can make Magneto as strong as they want for ABX and ABL because he's the only blast villain tier 4. He's not going to directly replace anyone. Like, sure, he indirectly replaces Iron Man Superior, but that wasn't the uniform they're trying to sell for Iron Man anyways, and Iron Man is still very, very good for other content. But even in the case of Magneto, as is the case with every other tier 4, they built in like a fatal flaw for the character that they can then power creep later with a character that is different but similar in some ways. So I'll give you an example. For Magneto, not only is it a holiday uniform, which means that if you missed it, you don't have him, so he's not good, right? But two, even at tier 4, if you're going to use the old Magneto uniforms, it's just mega yikes. But then two, he's very weak defensively. He has very low defenses, very low HP, right? Even at tier 4, he can die, which makes it difficult to use him in high level. It makes it more difficult to use him in high level World Boss Legend content. ABX and ABL don't really matter because the enemies don't do any damage to you, like unless you're taking hits from Surtur, which means you're losing score anyway, so you're not really playing correctly. But the way that it works is they can make characters very much glass cannons for ABX and ABL, and they can still sell those characters very easily to the player base and sort of market them as effective characters, even though they're not tanky and frustrating to play in other pieces of content, because it doesn't matter in ABX and ABL. It's an arcade game mode, right? There's no difficulty insofar as avoiding the attacks of the enemy. Sure, you avoid Surtur's attacks to not lose score, but you don't worry about the damage. So they sort of built this into every single character. They did it in different ways, right? For Thor, for example, Thor is not necessarily, he doesn't have a fatal flaw. He's just not the strongest in any one. Like, he's already been replaced by Jean and Black Bolt for damage as far as universal types go. He has no PvP relevance, and he has this weird quirk on his 5th skill where he just lingers there and does the entire animation even if there are no enemies around. So even though Thor is probably still the best overall character for farming, he will be replaced later by a character who at tier 4 won't necessarily be much better than him, but he will just have that one quirk removed. So just imagine they release another universal tier 4 in the future, and that universal tier 4 has maybe a little bit, maybe like 10% more damage than Thor, but not like a crazy amount more. But they're as fast at farming as Thor is, right? Like, they have a self-buffing leadership, and you can use them with 2 supports, blah, blah, blah. And they don't have a lingering ability. I mean, Black Bolt and Magneto sort of already do that, but you kind of get where this is going, where they're sort of just going to take the one thing that the character is not doing very well and just release a character who does do that thing very well, right? Like they released Moon Knight, obviously a very good PvE tier 4, and then of course the next combat tier 4 they release, a very good character for PvP, literally the opposite of what Moon Knight does not do. So they're going to continue to do this. Obviously, they're going to be a little bit better at, I assume they're going to be a little bit better at it as time goes on because of how much they screwed up with combat types. Like, they did make some of, like, there's just too much overlap between these characters. They did try really hard though, like you can see with Carnage. They did try pretty hard to make some of these characters like ambiguously good, in the sense that they're not the best, but they're also quite strong. Like, he's obviously a very much a hybrid character, whereas Namor is like all PvE with basically almost 0 PvP relevance, despite having insane base stats. They just didn't want players to consider him at all for PvP, unless you're like Alliance Conquest kind of player, because they wanted you to still maintain the value proposition in your head for both Hulk and Carnage, right? So I think we're going to see more of this in the future, where we get these really quirky characters. And I don't use quirky in like a good or a bad way. I guess the better way to put it is just like characters that don't make sense, like illogical characters. Like, there's no logic to Shadow Shell being amazing for World Boss Legend, amazing for ABL, and then bad for ABX. There's no logic there. ABX is easier than ABL. It is. It just is, right? Loki gets 12 million in ABX, and then with the same team or a similar team, he gets like 4 million in ABL. There's no way to justify that drop off in score unless you're saying ABL is harder, and ABL definitely is harder. So it makes no sense that Shadow Shell is struggling so much in ABX. Now, I'm not saying it's a bug for Shadow Shell. I'm saying it's an intentional design by the devs. They did it with Captain America. They did it with Shadow Shell. And if we are getting Spider-Man and Ant-Man tier 4 very soon, obviously Ant-Man's kind of a shoo-in, but if we are going to get Spider-Man, I expect to see something similar again, where the character will be very good for a few pieces of content, possibly the best, but then they will have one sort of built-in flaw that makes them uncharacteristically bad for a different piece of content to maintain the viability of the other existing tier 4s in the same category. Now, the thing is, Spider-Man and Ant-Man are both going to be male speed heroes. So that's where you're going to see possibly a difference, because there's no male speed hero for ABX and ABL, right? That doesn't exist. So that's the one thing that I think is going to be a little different here. But when you see sort of duplicates, right? Like the next universal, here's my guess. The next universal female villain, for example, is going to be really good for PvE, but terrible for PvP. Just terrible. And at that point, players will be able to make the decision, if they have Jean and they want to build this new character, to push Jean solely into PvP. That's my guess, right? Like, my guess is they're not going to make a universal female villain that's better than Jean for PvP. That would just be absurd. Like, that character would have to be so insanely strong. Jean has everything: reflect, revive, iframe ignore, time freeze. You know, she's got the whole shebang. There's no way. But them making a universal female villain that's better than Jean for PvE content, or just as good but not good for PvP, which then just gives you the flexibility anyways, I can definitely see them doing that. So yeah, that's what I wanted to bring up in today's video. It's a pretty interesting thing to watch, especially as someone who is not going to chase all the tier 4s. I'm definitely spending more time evaluating their value before investing in them, because like we've talked about before, at the current rate of farming, you cannot build more than one tier 4 every like 2.5 months, unless you're spending money. So I want to be more careful, but I also want to, you know, broaden the conversation so that people are considering these tier 4s, you know, not only as what they can do, but considering them compared to others and how they'll be power crept, how they'll be replaced in the future, and sort of why. And sort of use that to inform your decision on who you're going to invest in. So anyways, hit me up in the comments. Let me know what you think. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Sorry for yawning. Take care.